Adidas and Puma, two of the biggest names in sportswear, were born in the same tiny town of Herzogenaurach, Germany. Why? Because they share a wild history that's straight out of a family drama. It all started with two brothers, Adolf and Rudolf Dassler. Once close, they turned into fierce rivals and launched competing shoe empires. What followed was decades of betrayal, sabotage, and a sibling rivalry so intense it tore an entire town apart. This wasn't just business, it was personal. Even today, the feud between the Dassler brothers still splits their hometown in two. One side loyal to Adidas, the other to Puma. But this isn't just a story about sneakers. It's a dark tale of lies, secrets, betrayal, and corruption, stretching across two world wars. The brothers, Rudolf and Adolf Dassler, didn't just build empires. They joined the Nazi Party and even helped produce weapons for Hitler's army. Bound by blood, but torn apart by greed and ambition, their story is as unbelievable as it is true. Rudolf, nicknamed Rudi, was born in 1898 into a poor family. 2 years later came his younger brother, Adolf, Adi. Their early years were tough. They grew up in a small German town famous for shoemaking. Their father worked in a shoe factory, but his income wasn't enough to sustain the family. So their mother started a laundry business to make ends meet. Adi and Rudi would run around town delivering clothes, earning them the nickname the Laundry Boys. But childhood didn't last long. Both were drafted into World War I, and when they returned, they found their world completely changed. Their mother's business had collapsed, and post-war Germany was in economic ruins. What came next would change the world of sports forever. This time, it was Adi who came up with a bold idea to pull his family out of poverty. A lifelong sports enthusiast, Adi had always dreamed of becoming a shoemaker like his father. Back then, athletes didn't have event-specific shoes, and Adi saw an opportunity. What if he made lightweight spike shoes just for running? He believed it could give runners a serious edge, so he converted his mother's old laundry shed into a makeshift workshop. But the odds were brutal. Adi had no funds, no materials, and his town was still crawling out of the shadows of war. There wasn't even electricity to work with, but giving up? Not in Adi's vocabulary. Instead of buying supplies, he went full survival mode. He scavenged abandoned battlefields like a treasure hunter, peeling leather off worn-out helmets, yanking cords from fallen parachutes, and turning every scrap of military waste into something useful. Where others saw ruins, Adi saw raw material. With no electricity to rely on, Adi didn't sit back. He improvised. He jerry-rigged a leather cutter to a bicycle wheel and convinced a friend to pedal for hours on end just so production wouldn't stop. And it worked. His handcrafted shoes turned out to be tough, reliable, and soon the talk of the town. Adi became obsessed with every stitch, every sole, every curve of the design. He was constantly testing new materials, fine-tuning every little detail like an artist on a mission. Seeing the potential, his brother Rudi quit his job to join forces with Adi. Rudi, the charming and outgoing one, took charge of sales. Adi, the quiet perfectionist, focused on crafting the best sports shoes possible. Together, they seemed unstoppable. In 1924, the Dassler brothers launched their sports shoe company, but no one could have imagined that this promising partnership would eventually explode into one of the most iconic rivalries in business history. Giving birth to two of the biggest sports empires the world has ever seen. Rudi hustled hard, pitching Dassler shoes to every sports club across Germany. And it worked. Sales boomed, giving the brothers enough momentum to leave behind their tiny laundry shed workshop and upgrade to a proper factory with better tools and a growing team. With that, they could now produce even better shoes and expand into football boots just in time, as football was exploding in popularity across the country. Rudi, ever the salesman, started giving away free shoes to football clubs, confident that once players felt the quality, they'd come back for more. Business was booming. Adi kept refining the designs, and Rudi kept selling them faster. But then, Adolf Hitler rose to power, and everything changed. The Nazi regime aggressively promoted sports and physical fitness to fuel national pride and prepare the youth for war. Suddenly, there was a massive spike in demand for athletic shoes, and the Dassler brothers were perfectly positioned to cash in. Both Adi and Rudi officially joined the Nazi Party. While some argue this was a survival tactic for any business at the time, there's strong evidence they genuinely supported the regime. Rudi, in particular, was vocal about his political beliefs, while Adi worked closely with the Hitler Youth movement. Regardless of motivation, the brothers' business thrived under Nazi rule. Their biggest break came in 1936, when Germany hosted the Olympic Games, the first Olympics ever broadcast on television. The brothers saw a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. If they could get their shoes on world-class athletes, it would be the ultimate endorsement. And they had their eyes set on one man, Jesse Owens, the African-American track legend. But there was a catch. Hitler intended to use the Olympics to showcase the superiority of the Aryan race. Supporting a black athlete like Jesse Owens was risky, maybe even dangerous. But Adi didn't care. He believed in his product and knew Owens was the perfect ambassador. So he personally went to the Olympic Village, met Jesse, and offered him custom-made shoes. Owens agreed. Back then, athletes didn't expect endorsements or contracts, just a great pair of shoes, and what happened next changed everything. Jesse Owens won 4 gold medals while wearing Dassler shoes. The entire world was watching, and Hitler was fuming. His racial propaganda had been publicly shattered. But for the Dassler brothers, it was the biggest marketing win imaginable. The best athlete at the Olympics wore their shoes, and the world took notice. Thanks to Jesse Owens' iconic Olympic wins, orders started pouring in from around the world. On the outside, the Dassler brothers' business looked like a runaway success. But inside the family, things were falling apart. The factory was busier than ever, and so was the friction between Adi and Rudi. As the stakes grew, so did their egos. Rudi believed the business ran on his hustle, while Adi was convinced his craftsmanship was the real backbone. The pressure cooker finally burst after World War II began. Every business had to support the war effort, so Dassler Shoes started making boots, and eventually, weapons for Nazi soldiers. Now here's where it all started to spiral. Adi took the reins of production since he understood the technical side. Rudi, sidelined and bitter, started thinking Adi was trying to edge him out. Tensions grew even worse because the two brothers, along with their wives and kids, lived under the same roof. Imagine trying to run a company, survive a war, and share a house with the person you can't stand. Fights became the new normal. One night, as Allied bombs dropped nearby, Adi and his wife rushed into the basement shelter where Rudi and his wife were already hiding. Seeing them, Adi muttered, "The bastards are back." He meant the Allies. But Rudi, he took it personally. That moment became the final crack in their already fractured bond. Soon after, Rudi was drafted into the German army, while Adi stayed back to run the factory, now producing tank parts. Alone on the front lines, Rudi grew increasingly paranoid. He even accused Adi of lacking the leadership to run the business and demanded his wife act as his stand-in. Adi refused. The brotherly bond officially turned toxic. Rudi retaliated by reporting Adi to Nazi officials, claiming he was hoarding leather, an offense in wartime Germany. Adi was briefly detained and questioned, and it didn't stop there. After the war, during a sweeping investigation into Nazi collaborators, Rudi was imprisoned on suspicion of deep ties to the regime. He spent nearly a year in a POW camp, stewing in anger. Then came the real twist. U.S. officials later revealed Rudi had been reported by someone close. Rudi was convinced Adi had betrayed him. When Rudi was released, Adi was facing his own charges, war profiteering. Rudi didn't hesitate to testify against him. Adi denied all allegations, and eventually both brothers were cleared. But the damage, irreversible. Their relationship was completely destroyed. Whispers of an affair between Rudi and Adi's wife made things even murkier, though it's hard to separate truth from gossip. What's clear is this: after years of betrayal, jealousy, and bitter power plays, the brothers couldn't even stand to be in the same room. In 1948, they called it quits. They split the company in two. Adi launched Adidas, Rudi founded Puma, and from that day on, the rivalry turned personal. Fueled by vengeance, the brothers spent the rest of their lives trying to outdo and sabotage each other's legacy. When it came time to name their companies, Adi kept it personal. He took his nickname Adi and combined it with the first part of his surname, Dassler, to create Adidas. Rudi tried something similar. He initially went with Ruda, a mashup of Rudolph and Dassler, but something about it didn't sit right. A few weeks later, he switched it up to Puma, sleeker, punchier, and he believed it captured the fierce, agile spirit that athletes strived for. But breaking one empire into two rival companies, that was pure chaos. The factory had to be split, the assets divided, and, most painfully, the employees had to pick a side. The engineers and designers mostly chose Adi, while the sales and marketing crew stuck with Rudi. And in their sleepy little hometown of Herzogenaurach, that split wasn't just business, it was personal. You see, a river sliced the town right down the middle, and now, so did the Dassler feud. Adidas set up on one side of the river, and Puma claimed the other. Over time, each side became its own world. Adidas workers sent their kids to one school, Puma workers sent theirs to another. Entire families grew up without crossing the bridge. Even dating across company lines was taboo, basically a betrayal. Neighborhood gangs didn't just fight over turf, they clashed over sneakers. Wearing Puma on Adidas territory, dangerous. Wearing Adidas on Puma soil, equally risky. The divide got so intense, the town earned a strange nickname, the town of Bent Neck. Why? Because everyone kept looking down at your shoes before deciding whether to talk to you. Your kicks were your loyalty badge. The only guy who dared to play peacemaker? The mayor. At public events, he wore one Adidas and one Puma, like a walking treaty, to avoid taking sides. In the beginning, it was actually tough to tell an Adidas shoe from a Puma one. They looked nearly identical. But Adi had a genius move up his sleeve. To give his shoes more stability, he added 3 leather stripes on the sides. Then, in 1949, he decided to paint those stripes white. It was bold, clean, and instantly recognizable. People loved it. Overnight, Adidas shoes had a signature look, and Puma didn't. Now that both brands had their own identities, the real game was on. Who would become Germany's ultimate sportswear king? The perfect opportunity arrived. Germany's first ever FIFA World Cup since the war. Rudi tried to make his move first. He personally knew the German team's coach and thought he could lock in a deal to get the team to wear Puma boots. But negotiations broke down, mostly over payment. Rudi was sure the coach would come back begging, but instead, the coach turned around and struck a deal with Adi. So when Germany stepped onto the World Cup pitch, it was in Adidas boots. At first, no one expected much. The team wasn't doing great, and morale was low. But against all odds, Germany reached the finals. That alone was a shocker. But the final match, that was a whole different beast. They were up against Hungary, a team that hadn't lost a single match in 4 years. Just before the game kicked off, it began to rain. That rain turned out to be Adi's biggest blessing. Adi had crafted special boots for the German team, with interchangeable screw-in studs. When the pitch got wet and slippery, German players stayed upright while Hungarian players kept slipping and sliding. Hungary scored first, then again. 2-0. Everyone thought it was over, but then Germany scored, and again. And in the dying minutes of the game, they pulled ahead. Final whistle. Germany 3, Hungary 2. Against all odds, West Germany were world champions. For the first time since the war, Germans had something to celebrate. The victory was so unexpected, it was dubbed the Miracle of Bern, and the man behind the miracle boot, Adi Dassler. Overnight, he went from shoemaker to national icon. After Germany's World Cup win, Adidas saw a massive boom in demand. The shoes were flying off shelves. Meanwhile, Rudi was fuming. He knew he had missed a once-in-a-lifetime chance to put Puma in the global spotlight. And just when things couldn't get worse for him, they did. 2 years later, at the Melbourne Olympics, something bizarre happened. Puma's shipment of shoes didn't clear customs, but Adidas's smooth sail. Whispers started floating around. Had someone paid off the officials to keep Puma out and let Adidas take over the Olympic stage? All fingers pointed at Adi. No proof, but the rumor was enough to fuel Rudi's rage even more. What followed next was nothing short of a full-blown brand war. The rivalry hit another gear. Every move Adidas made, Puma matched, and vice versa. Both brands started expanding globally. Shoes weren't enough anymore. They launched into apparel, socks, shorts, sneakers, everything. It was no longer just business. It was revenge-fueled empire building, and the battleground now had new warriors. Adi brought his son Horst into the ring to help steer Adidas. Rudi did the same with his son Armin for Puma. You'd think maybe the next gen would leave the bitterness behind. Spoiler alert, they didn't. Instead of peace, the family feud became deeper. Horst and Armin had their own scores to settle. The Dassler rivalry was no longer just brother versus brother. It was bloodline versus bloodline. Adidas and Puma's sibling rivalry had now spilled into the world of athlete endorsements. This wasn't just business. It was a full-blown celebrity tug of war. The goal? To get the biggest names in sports to wear their shoes, lavish dinners, exotic gifts, ridiculous offers. No price was too high if it meant beating the other. But by the time the 1968 Olympics rolled around, things had spiraled. Horst and Armin were stuck in constant bidding wars, throwing money at athletes like confetti at a wedding. Profits crashed. Pride, sky high, logic, non-existent. So before the 1970 World Cup in Mexico, the two made a secret pact. One rule: Pelé is off limits. Pelé wasn't just the best footballer alive, he was a walking billboard, a global icon. Whoever got him would dominate the market. But they both knew that if even one tried to sign him, the other would counter with more money. It would end in another financial disaster. So they agreed, no one signs Pelé. And then, betrayal. In the quarterfinals, the whole world had their eyes glued to the screen. The players took their positions, and right in the middle of it all was Pelé, wearing Puma shoes. But Armin didn't stop there. Pelé, with cameras zooming in, casually asked the referee to pause. Then, in what would become one of the most iconic marketing stunts of all time, he bent down and tied his shoelaces. For those few seconds, Puma hijacked global television. Subtle, brilliant, brutal. Turns out, Armin had secretly signed Pelé for $125,000 and choreographed the moment for maximum exposure. And it worked. Pelé led Brazil to win the World Cup. Puma's image soared worldwide, and their shoes flew off shelves. Horst? He was livid. The pact was shattered. The family feud reignited. Hotter, deeper, and more personal than ever before. By the time Adi and Rudi were in their 70s, their feud was still burning strong. Decades had passed, but not a word had been exchanged. And even when Rudi was dying of lung cancer, Adi didn't visit. Not once. He didn't even show up at the funeral. When Adi died a few years later, fate kept the divide alive. Both brothers were buried in the same town, but at opposite ends of the cemetery. Even in death, they stayed enemies. With the founders gone, their sons Horst and Armin were now at the helm, but neither of them could fill their father's shoes. Horst went all in on sponsorships, pumping Adidas's money into flashy deals while completely ignoring what customers actually wanted. Meanwhile, Armin tried to blindly scale Puma up to Adidas's size, sacrificing product quality in the process. By the late 70s and early 80s, both companies were spiraling, and by 1989, the empire built by the Dasslers was collapsing. Both brands were nearly bankrupt. Eventually, they sold their companies to private investors. Without the Dasslers, Adidas and Puma became someone else's burden. But their real punishment? While they were too busy fighting each other, Nike quietly took over the world. After Horst Dassler passed away in 1987, Adidas was bought by French businessman Bernard Tapie. Then in 1994, a man named Robert Louis Dreyfus became CEO. He brought a new vision: make Adidas the brand for real athletes, but also make it cool again. Under him, Adidas launched iconic products like Predator boots, partnered with legends like Beckham, Kobe, and Agassi, and in 2006 acquired Reebok for $3.8 billion. Then came the biggest flex, the Yeezy collab with Kanye West in 2013. It became a billion-dollar juggernaut. Thanks to Dreyfus, Adidas wasn't just back, it was booming. Meanwhile, Puma took a different route. In 1993, a young German exec named Jochen Zeitz took charge. His first mission? Fix the quality. Once Puma's products were solid again, he didn't try to beat Adidas at its own game. He changed the game. Zeitz moved into niche sports like Formula One, teamed up with bold designers like Alexander McQueen, and even brought Rihanna on board as creative director. Puma became more than just a sports brand. It became a statement in fashion. By the mid-2000s, Puma had reclaimed its status as a billion-dollar brand, and today it sits just behind Nike and Adidas as the world's third largest sportswear company. And in 2009, 1999, something unexpected happened. After decades of rivalry, Adidas and Puma hosted a friendly football match in their hometown. Employees from both companies played on mixed teams, and the two CEOs even stood on the same side of the field. It was a moment of peace. But even today, their hometown remains split. Adidas headquarters on one side of the river, Puma on the other. You can't help but wonder, if the Dassler brothers hadn't wasted so much time fighting each other, would Nike have ever stood a chance?